speaker is Paul McKay. Paul has won several times, has won the top awards in Canada for investigative reporting. I met him because he happened to write a book called Atomic Accomplice, How Canada Deals in Deadly Deceit. And if that isn't a pretty good introduction to where this gentleman is coming from, I guess we can start from there. He's also, I have to say, in his CVs, he's also at one point been a senior policy advisor to the Ontario government in the Ministry of Energy. Paul McKay.
Thank you very much. I'm kind of a last-minute stand-in. I was asked to come a couple of weeks ago to replace another speaker. So I hope what I have to say doesn't disappoint you. You're not expecting something different or something more professionally polished, but here goes. And as a journalist, my job is to try and tell complicated stories, relate complicated events and complicated scientific issues in ordinary language, because it's extremely important for all information to be democratized. So I'm going to refrain from technical jargon for the most part, and hopefully that's a good way to do it. So every week, millions of people in North America tune into their favorite crime show called CSI. In each episode, intrepid investigators have 1 hour minus commercial time to discover and capture the outlaw. Often the only clues are fingerprints found at the crime scene, 10 unique, potentially incriminating signatures, just like the ones on our fingertips. It's a tough job, but miraculously those CSI sleuths always beat the odds and the clock. Now imagine 1 year after 3 reactor core meltdowns at Fukushima, that the outlaws to track are not human lowlifes, but escaped radionuclides, some with half-lives that extend for centuries, even epochs. This is where the dimensions of humanity's dance with the deadly atom and the impossibility of closing this crime case hit home. Let's start with a condensed summary of the physics and biology, as if we were guest detectives on CSI. Much to our deep chagrin, we find, 1, the crimes are still in progress. Despite claims of full shutdown, Tokyo Electric Power Company does not know the fate of the molten cores at units 1, 2, or 3, or even how to inspect these. That means the accident is not over, and may not be for years. Meanwhile, radiation is still escaping into nearby air and water, and radioactive garbage is accumulating. And no one knows how or where to dispose of the 3 molten cores, or the 10 reactors worth of spent fuel at the Fukushima site, or if they can even be retrieved. 2, instead of 1 outlaw with a single set of fingerprints to track, the Fukushima reactors each created more than 200 distinctly different but deadly fission products as part of their normal operations. There's a comparable list of fission signatures or fragments in CANDU used reactor fuel. Every civilian reactor of any make, model, country of origin, or location creates a similar radioactive inventory. Okay, so here's the list, and I'll just go through this briefly, just to give you the idea. This is the list of radioactive fragments or transuranic elements that are in CANDU used reactor fuel. There's a roughly comparable list from all used reactor fuel, including at Fukushima. So these are all the radioactive byproducts also that Kathy mentioned this morning. So there's 211 of them. So these 211 submolecular transuranic outlaws are invisible, tasteless, and odorless. So they can escape without being discovered by a single ordinary human witness. Only those with radiation equipment can trace their escape route long after the fact. And often, as at Fukushima, those who initially hold the radiation detection equipment either doesn't work or they lie about the results. Next, like drones or cruise missiles, these radioactive elements hone in on specific targets in animals and humans, but they infiltrate our defenses by mimicking chemicals and trace elements we need to absorb to survive. So they are diabolical masters of disguise. Instead of going for a single knockout blow, they choose multiple targets in the body, such as teeth, bones, muscle tissue, and reproductive organs. This increases the chances of deadly success. Next, because they constantly emit subatomic powerful bursts of energy, they act as time-lapse cluster bombs inside bodies, perpetually ejecting deadly fragments of energy that damage or destroy adjacent cells, as Kathy's slide showed this morning. Some of the most invidious outlaws, such as plutonium, seek to invade and occupy reproductive organs. These can then cause damage to current generations of male and female animals and humans. Worse, because women of childbearing age have a single lifetime stock of ova, renegade radionuclides can damage those cells and genes. I've lost a little bit of my speech here. Next, all these 211 radiological outlaws have innate embedded properties that make them uniquely, diabolically deadly. Like pathological criminals, they are programmed to keep killing and damaging living cells of animals and humans. Like criminal gangs, they are programmed to bioaccumulate in plants, fish, insects, reptiles, birds, mollusks, mammals, and humans, so that the prospects for cell damage and destruction magnify in each species, and then in multiple species throughout the food chain. The radioactive half-life natures mean some cellular damage, crime sprees will last only for hours or days, but many will keep killing or maiming exposed cells for centuries. The outlaws can strike as alpha, beta, or gamma emitters, and sometimes as combinations. So a triple defense system, or 3 kinds of biological protective shielding, are needed for all exposed cells. It is one thing to defend an assault with tanks. It is another to also need supersonic jets and battleships. And as Kathy mentioned this morning, particularly vulnerable to cell damage are women of childbearing age, because the damaged cells can cause genetic damage to children and possibly future generations, putting the human gene pool at risk. Also particularly vulnerable to attack of children because radionuclides readily attack cells as they are multiplying. So to return to the CSI analogy, health professionals confronted with new Fukushima radiation releases are not facing the task of finding a single criminal who had a perceived motive but may never commit another crime, may be captured, or may suffer remorse and turn himself in. Instead, the task is to track, without real-time witnesses, 211 shape-shifting masters of disguise which have no conscience whatsoever, which target women and children first, which invade and occupy organs by mimicking exactly what vital chemicals they need, and can put the gene pool of any or many species at risk. If these radionuclides were people, they would be condemned as permanent psychopaths. And as if that were not alarming enough, we now turn to the global volume of radionuclides already poised to do more malevolent damage. There are some 440 operating civilian nuclear reactors in the world. Each has a deadly inventory similar to that at Fukushima, or the fallout from several dozen atomic bomb tests. Each will produce spent fuel waste embedding this inventory of 211 radioactive outlaws. But there is nowhere on Earth where there is a proven, safe, publicly accepted method or location for disposing of the latently lethal wastes from these 440 reactors. In my view, the physics and biology tell us that radioactive outlaws can never be caught until far too late. Their crimes can never be solved. The 211 radioactive fugitives never captured. The task is impossible, even for CFI. Therefore, while important, the key issue for us is not optimal radiation monitoring. It is about how to stop new reactors from being built and more uranium from being mined. Equally importantly, it is about adopting green power technologies and smart energy use so that nuclear power plants become irrelevant. Before I get to the good news, and there is very good news, I want to spend a few minutes summarizing the second spectral aspect of global nuclear commerce from a Canadian culpability point of view. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a group of leading American physicists who had helped build the first atomic bombs and knew the secrets that they had stolen from nature could be inevitably replicated. They pleaded with U.S. Presidents Truman and Eisenhower to prevent an atomic arms race by first and foremost putting all uranium mining under strict international control. They understood that this was the key choke point for preventing proliferation, and that allowing uranium to be traded like wheat, steel, farm tractors, or lumber in global commerce would be the worst thing that could happen. So here's why. It took a grapefruit-sized sphere of uranium-235 to destroy Hiroshima. It took a plum-sized sphere of plutonium to destroy Nagasaki. But all of the fissile material in these first two bombs did not detonate. In fact, only an amount of fissile material of this size was needed to destroy two cities. So when you take this scale of destruction possible in these cores of fissile material, consider, so it takes about 20 kilograms of uranium-235 to make an atomic weapon. It takes about 8 kilograms of plutonium to make an atomic bomb. Yet, every metric ton of uranium contains 7 grams of uranium-235. So every 3 tons has enough uranium-235 in it to build an atomic bomb. And every ton of uranium-235 that gets burned up in a typical reactor, whether it's a Canadian reactor or one at Fukushima or one in Russia or one in India or China, produces about 2.5 kilograms of plutonium. So you need 4 tons of uranium to be transmuted into one atomic bomb's worth of plutonium. So I know these are a lot of numbers, and I'd be happy to give a copy, and you can look these up later. So I want to contrast this amount of uranium with the amount that Canada is exporting every year, which is 7.3 million tons. Embedded in these exports is enough uranium-235 atoms to make 2,600 atomic bombs per year. If it is burned in reactors, as Canadian uranium was at Fukushima, some 19,000 kilograms of plutonium will reside in the spent fuel. That's enough to make 2,300 plutonium bombs per year. So while President Obama is laudably leading global efforts to cut Cold War nuclear weapons stockpiles, each year Canada is exporting the very outlaw elements which can be converted into some 5,000 atomic weapons. Last month, our Prime Minister was in China, shamelessly flogging uranium and candy reactors to a communist regime which during the last 3 decades has covertly supplied nuclear weapons technology, expertise, and crucial ingredients to North Korea, Pakistan, the infamous nuclear Walmart network of road scientist A.Q. Khan, and to Iran and Libya. China has refused to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it has refused to sign the pending UN-sponsored Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. So has India, Canada's other leading target for uranium and reactor sales, which in 1974 used a peaceful Candu reactor to make plutonium for its first atomic bomb. Now it has 100 weapons of mass destruction, including hydrogen bombs. Its arch-rival, Pakistan, has a similar arsenal. Stephen Harper has also quietly agreed to delete or weaken what porous protocols now exist in our bilateral nuclear treaties. This is not only the height of recklessness with weapon states like China, India, and Pakistan, but even worse, completely undercuts global efforts to strengthen proliferation regimes. This is happening in part because the Fukushima accident has blown a gaping hole in the nuclear renaissance. Globally, only 2 reactors started construction last year. Germany, Italy, Switzerland, Belgium, and many other countries have vetoed any new nuclear reactors ever. This leaves companies like Canada's uranium producer Cameco and the French giant Areva with slashed uranium orders and share prices, big debt burdens, and lots of uranium properties they can't unload. Cameco's share price, and Cameco is a Canadian company with the largest producer of uranium in the world, their stock share prices fallen from $67 in 2007 to less than $24. In the same period, uranium prices fell from $140 per pound to $52 per pound. In short, the nuclear industry is desperate. And desperate players usually turn to their governments to help grease more sails, give deeper subsidies, and cut environmental, labor safety, or other costs like non-proliferation safeguards. So I urge everyone here to keep their eye on that very dangerous shellgame. Last but not least, I want to share some uplifting evidence that there is a path out of this commerce without conscience. I want to include this for 3 reasons. One, because we have reached now the cusp where green power is a technically and financially viable replacement for the 13% of world electricity now supplied by nuclear plants. 2, because the nuclear nexus of corporations, scientists, government bureaucracies, and unions, which have brought us atomic theocracies, such as that in Japan, are marshalling a counterattack to preserve their discredited empires. And 3, for morale. Like those health professionals working to prevent pandemics, we need to see and believe that the equivalent of antiviral vaccines are ready to deploy. Green power and energy efficiency are our antidote. This is the basis for real sustaining hope. For economic, environmental, and ethical reasons, I am certain the global advent of green power is as inevitable as the internet vaulting the Great Wall of China or the take-up of cell phones in the poorest areas of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Only a decade ago, those were unthinkable or available and affordable for only a few. But their intrinsic utility and low cost driven by mass production changed all that. Despite an often despotic government, digital democracy in China is now unstoppable. And farmers in rural Kenya or street stall vendors in Jakarta often have better, cheaper cell phone service than I do in rural Ontario. Thrillingly, the same dynamic is now at play with green power technologies. Worldwide investments are on a steep incline. The price per watt for solar panels has decreased 70% since 2008, and wind costs per watt have fallen 20% due to design innovation, better production processes, and lower material usage and costs. Just as smartphones served as the spark for countless ingenious ways to revolutionize social networks and business, and even for actual revolutions such as the recent Arab Spring uprisings, the green power sector is underpinning the development of complementary smart grid power storage and interactive grid transfer technologies. Here, efficiency, economics, and scale are imminent key drivers. Ironically, it will be rising gasoline prices and the electric car which serves as the tipping point. Here's why. Grid-charged electric engines can get people from point A to point B at 1/5 the fuel cost of gasoline engines. A new electric vehicle can go 24,000 kilometers for less than $500 on grid-charged power. A comparably sized new gas-powered car will cost $2,100 to go the same distance. That $1,600 fuel saving can be used to entirely pay off a typical annual household bill. So by simply switching from a gas to an electric vehicle, a citizen can cut their annual mobility costs to $500 and effectively get a year's worth of household electric power for free. Why? Because electric motors deliver power to car wheels 5 times more efficiently than gasoline motors. This is an example of an efficiency dividend, but there is even better news. There are already more than 220 million cars in North America which collectively hold 30 times more power in their batteries than the combined peak power output of all the continent's power plants. These vehicles are idle on average 80% of every day. So here's what's coming here, but also in Japan, Europe, China, India, and Brazil. The 20th century grid model, which saw electrons flow only one way from giant, expensive, and often dangerous power plants, will be replaced by an interactive two-way electron flow, which reacts in milliseconds to regional demand and supply choices. Much of that power will be stored in and dispensed from millions of vehicle batteries as they sit idle in garages, workplace parking lots, and shopping malls. These batteries will act just like bank cards, depositing and withdrawing electrons instead of cash. You will get a statement at the end of the month calculating your net electron balance and your costs for charging and selling based on off-peak and on-peak rates. You will be your own mobile utility. This imminent game-changing combination of economics, technology, and scale explains why billions of dollars in smart investment capital around the world is increasingly heading for green power projects, grid storage technology, battery development, and electrical vehicle production. This is why non-oil or non-utility utility giants like General Electric, Siemens, Samsung, Sharp, Toshiba, and India's Tata conglomerate have got into the game in a big way. And why companies like Ford and SunPower have formed a joint venture to sell both electric cars and solar panels to power them from the same showrooms across the continent. Based on these trends, in the fourth quarter of 2000 alone, investments in global green power projects were up 16% to $42 billion. So that's $200 billion per year. Recently, German banks announced $130 billion in support for green power and smart grid projects for the next 5 years. Based on these trends, even that notorious socialist outfit known as Goldman Sachs has forecast that within 3 years, green power parks will reach cost parity with new U.S. coal plants. Mass-produced electric vehicles will be right behind. The interactive grid will be right behind those. This bounty is the antithesis of the threat that nuclear fission and its 211 radioactive outlaws offers. Green power represents a real renaissance. It is the safest, fastest, surest path.